Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Our research-backed videos are engaging, easy to follow, and they help ease the daily challenges like agitation and anxiety so that you can focus on connection and joy. Available by subscription on mobile and TV apps, Zinnia makes every day a little bit easier. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
Welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast, a podcast about the popes of Rome and Christian Church. Prepare yourself to step behind the ropes and leave the official tour of the story of the popes and Christianity. I am your host, Steve Guerra, and I thank you for joining me on this journey.
Hi guys, very special episode today. We are going to find out something about my very favourite podcaster, friend and mentor, Steve Guerra, who currently resides in Austin, Texas. I met Steve through his podcast, History of the Papacy. Now, Steve, you've got a lot more podcasts going now, haven't you?
Well, I first want to say thank you, Garry, for coming up with this idea. I think the first collaboration we did was something of a Meet the Podcaster. And when you brought this up, I was like, oh, that's a pretty good idea to do that. And then I was like, well, actually, it's a brilliant idea because I know for the most part, I do very little talk about my day-to-day and that sort of thing in the podcast. And I know that you don't do very much of that in your podcast. I think the last one we did was in maybe 8 years ago, every bit of 7 or 8 years ago. So it's probably not a bad idea to do a little update along the way.
Well, first, can you run through all the podcasts you do currently?
Well, I have the History of the Papacy podcast. That's sort of my mainstay, my flagship podcast. I also have Beyond the Big Screen and Organized Crime and Punishment. Organized Crime and Punishment, I'm put on the back burner. Beyond the Big Screen, I update that probably the most regularly right now. But History of the Papacy podcast, where I detail the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church, little snippets of history of the papacy and church, and definitely getting into the Bible as well. Those come out every 2 weeks. That is going to be my main hobby side gig.
Now, you've been putting them out every 2 weeks for quite a long time, haven't you?
Been trying at least.
I've been doing this about 10 years, and you've been doing it for about 11, I think.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to take up podcasting as a hobby?
Well, all the way back in the heady days of 2013, I had had a time in life where I was like, I need a project. I needed something that was creative, but I felt like I always wanted to do something that had a product at the end of it as a hobby. I love the fact that with podcasting, there's so many other things you can do. It's not just talking into the microphone. It can be that, and there's plenty of shows that do that sort of thing. But I really like the aspect of the audio visual equipment, the learning software, trying to continually make the product better. I think that that's as much fun as actually making the content. And then, of course, the research and the recording. It's all fun. And I think the way that I've always tried to do it is try to minimize the pressure of not being on what a lot of the YouTubers call of the production wheel, where you're constantly trying to think of new ideas and you're finishing production of one thing and then you're constantly going on to the next thing and then to keep pumping out content. And I've never felt like I've had to do that.
Okay. And now why did you decide on the papacy?
even just before I had even gotten into the producing the episodes, I love that the aspect that there was so many different ways to tell the story. And there's people who they go from pope to pope to pope and they'll rank the popes and that sort of thing. And you can certainly do that as biographies. Biography has never been a genre that very much interests me. I'm more interested in looking at the institution of the papacy and the institution of the church and the history and the impacts that it's had on different cultures and societies. Christianity and then the papacy seem to be a really good jumping off point for that exploration.
Did you moot other shows that you might do, or were you thinking from the beginning?
I remember when I was first coming up with an idea of a podcast, I don't know, I was just instantly drawn to that. I think at that time I was reading a ton about church history and papal history. Maybe if they had caught me on a phase where I was reading about professional wrestlers, I would have had a professional wrestling podcast. But at that current time and place in 2012, 2013, I was really reading a ton of church history. So I think that's why I really grabbed into it.
Now, why did you decide to branch out into other shows, which are completely different in topic and content?
I think in a lot of ways beyond the big screen. So beyond the big screen, and you can definitely still go and subscribe to that. It's on YouTube and all the podcatchers, etc. I think that one really fed into the same kind of base idea that I was going for with the history of the papacy, is to look at a topic and find out what is the background of it. What are the pieces that we're missing? And I think that movies are such a great way, because a movie, any sort of movie, they give you a certain perspective, but there's a lot of background that you can fill in the blanks on. And a lot of the most favorite movies that we've talked about on the podcast are movies that were adapted from novels. I love reading fiction, and I've always been fascinated on how a filmmaker will take a novel and adapt that to the visual format, because it's such a vastly different thing. The printed word versus showing versus telling. My whole idea with the podcast, especially with the history of the papacy, is telling a story over just recitation of facts. And I love storytelling, even though I wouldn't say that I'm a good storyteller. That's always been my goal.
Now, I often hear a criticism, which I disagree with, and I'd like to see if you agree with me. A lot of people who have both, say, read the novel and seen the film, they'll complain, oh, it left this out, it left that out. Oh, no, this person isn't really like that. Now, I think, no, that criticism just doesn't wash. A film is a totally different thing to the novel. You can't complain that it's not the novel. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. You really have to. And when a filmmaker is taking a novel, they have to take the essence of the novel. And a lot of times what the essence of the novel to you might be very different to me or to the next person who read that novel. And they might understand it in a very different way than even the novelist understood the book. I think you see that most pronounced in Philip K. Dick's movie or novels and short stories that got translated into a movie. I think the only actual full-length novel of his that was turned into a film was Do Electric Sheep Dream of, what's the title? It's a ridiculously long title, but it got turned into Blade Runner. It was a full-length novel. It got translated into the movie. And it was the only one of the Dick's written works that he was alive during.
Oh.
And he was on the production of the movie and all that. And he hated the movie. He hated everything about it. And he put up constant roadblocks to everything in the movie. And the movie wound up turning out kind of a disaster. The original cut that came out in 1980, I want to say 1982, 80. In a large part, it was that the director didn't get to really do what he wanted to do, and the Philip K. Dick didn't get what he wanted out of it. And so the later on, the director put out a director's cut that was much better than the original theatrical release. I believe they added a speech in the director's cut by the robot played by Rutger Hauer, which was really good.
Is that the Tears in the Rain speech when he's dying?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great speech. Apparently he wrote it. He came up with it himself. But Blade Runner is now regarded as one of the classic science fiction movies.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think a motto of that is, do not let the writer on the set.
I did I think a 4 or 5 part series on the Blade Runner, on the original and the new one. And one thing that I think I didn't even know they existed myself. And one of the problems I had with the movie is that I think it was missing a lot of exposition, that you just didn't know why things were happening. But Villeneuve did 3 shorts. I think they were about 10 minutes, 15 minutes long, that filled in some of the gaps that made things in the movie make more sense. They were only on the website or something like that. And I don't know if he was going to use that to maybe make prequels or something that never happened.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
Now, your final show on crime. Why crime?
That was more of an experiment. And we still may revive it at some point. My co-host and I, Chris, we had stumbled into the mafia. We had started talking about mafia movies. And then there was just so much history. So we wanted to make a history podcast based on crime. A lot of the true crime that's out there, they're very sloppy with the history, I found. And I wanted to make a podcast, or at least experiment with a podcast that took the history of crime seriously. And that's what it was. That was really the basis of it. It was a true crime history, a crime history podcast. Like I said, life has gotten in the way of that. I would like to do that again, to really experiment with true crime, but through a history, giving it the treatment like you've done with the Bible and I've done with the Papacy and people have done with World War II. Our friend Gil with the Bible, James Early with World War II. Give crime its due. I've heard so many true crime podcasts where they get fundamental details wrong, or they're really sloppy with the background of it. And I think that it deserves better treatment than it gets often.
Okay, so you're sort of objecting to the focus on exciting murders and misdeeds as opposed to the grand historical context within which these are all embedded.
Yes, absolutely.
You thinking of starting any other new podcasts soon?
No, that's it.
Where'd you get the time to do all this? Because you're a beekeeper, husband, father. Podcasting is time consuming. So how do you fit it all in?
That's why I'm really going down to one. One is much more manageable than doing 3. That's for sure. Or even doing 2. One podcast is a fun hobby that, I can really work on and make and do well. 2 or 3 is not doable. but maybe one day.
Do you ever get any objections from your family? Oh, Dad's back in the shed talking into his little microphone.
That definitely happens. That happens on occasion, especially with 3, and they're done with other collaborators who are in different time zones. So I'm in my closet recording booth here at all hours, or after a long day of work from my day job, and then they'll getting in and strapping in to do 3 hours of recording. It can be taxing.
Have you got any future directions for the Papacy podcast? Have you got any exciting new or surprising new avenues you want to explore?
Well, the next big series that I'm going to tackle is I'm going to go into American history.
Oh.
I'm going to look at the history of the Catholic Church specifically in the United States, because even North American history or the Americas history is way too big. So I'm going to focus pretty much exclusively from 1776 to the Civil War. The goal is about 10 episodes of the history of the Catholic Church in the United States in that time period. During this time where you have the French and they're Catholic and they're doing their thing, and then you have the Spanish, they're Catholic and they're doing their own thing. But then you have the English, who are largely Protestant, but the Catholic Church explodes in America during this time period, especially in the early 1800s to the 1860s. And just in the preliminary reading that I've done, it's fascinating to see a church that had such exponential growth. A large part of the growth was from immigration, but a lot of it was through conversion. How did they deal with this being in a largely Protestant milieu? How did the Catholic Church grow and organize with the push and pull that they're really not native, so to speak, of the U.S.? And always the dominant culture, the Protestant culture, is distrustful of this group, this religious group that has really deep connections to the French, who they don't love. Groups of Germans that aren't really beloved, the Spanish. And then as Southern Europeans come in, that they're all owing allegiance also to this foreign power, the Pope. But then the Pope doesn't really trust these people who are more and more becoming anglicized in America. It makes for a really interesting story and dichotomy.
Yeah, I've always thought of the United States as basically Protestant. Now, the Irish would have a big part to play in that, wouldn't they?
Oh, yeah, and the Irish. One of the big things is also certain English who had been here for quite a long time in the Maryland colony, specifically, who had converted to Catholicism, or they were old Catholics who had never converted. In a lot of ways, they rode out a lot of and did their own thing during the time of great tumult within the papacy during the French Revolution and in the early 1800s. Like, for example, the Jesuit order had been completely abolished in Europe and in the places like Spain and Portugal and all of their foreign colonies. But they were given a home, so to speak, in America, where they were allowed to, they weren't openly Jesuits, but they were keeping their institutions going. It was really in America and in Russia, of all places, where the Jesuits kept their institutional integrity. Then when their order was legal again, they were able to bounce back, because in America and in a few other local pockets, they were able to at least survive through that time period. And I thought that was just really interesting, that American bishops and American Catholics were often very much at odds with what was going on in Rome, but they could also be the standard bearers of what was going on in Rome as well.
I've never understood what is the problem with the Jesuits? Why were they disbanded and then reconstituted?
At that time, it was a problem that the Spanish kingdom and the Portuguese kingdom had with them on things that they were doing in South America predominantly. The French never loved them, so it was an ease, and the French monarchy was in a lot of ways controlled by what the Spanish did at that time, and there was a lot of internal politics. Or no, it was the reverse. The Spanish did what the French said to do. But it was the Jesuits in South America were setting up communal farms where they weren't basically treating the natives like garbage, like the Spanish wanted them to, and they didn't like that. Monarchies didn't like a group that was independent of them and didn't answer through to them. And the popes didn't really want to ban them, but the political pressure became such that they did get banned for about, I want to say 20 or 30 years. And I did an entire series on that time period if people want to go and listen.
Oh, okay. So they were only disbanded for about 20, 30 years. That's not too long.
No.
What is your process you go through to prepare for each show, and how far ahead do you prepare? Do you read from scripts? Do you work from outlines? So we're not talking about, shows like this. What's your general process?
Generally, if I'm coming into a new series, I try and read a book or two about the series and then of the topic once I've gotten the kernel of an idea so that I can get the 10,000 or maybe at that point, the 100,000 foot view of the topic. And then I'll start outlining, okay, I want to talk about this, and this to try and, like I've said before, is try and develop a story to follow. And then after that, I just start researching an individual topic and writing. And I used to read from scripts, but I've gone more to writing outlines and bullet points to jump off of. And that can make things easier and harder. But I think it makes it sound, at least for me, a little bit more natural to have a script with bullet points as opposed to a actual written out script, word for word script. And so that's really the process, is to really start out in the most granular and then zoom into as much detail as I feel is necessary. And it's really a personal preference. And for the audience that I think that I want to go to is the person who, if they really want to know all this stuff, they can go read a book themselves. They can go read 100 books on any of these topics themselves. I want to bring something that for somebody who's interested, it'll be like, that's interesting. Maybe I will go read another book about the topic. Or maybe for that person who, hey, that was enough for them. That's what I'm really looking for, and to fill in the background of it so that if they do go read another book, they have something framework to hang their new knowledge on.
Do you find that working from outlines makes the audio editing a lot more difficult?
It can. When I do it, I have to be a lot more cognizant of where I'm stopping. So I'll have to let myself know, and I'll talk into the microphone. Okay, stop here, cut that out. So I have to be more thoughtful about it. I guess if I had just a straight script, it might be easier. But I don't think once I've gotten used to it, it's not a huge difference.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
For a given episode, are you thinking about episode X days, weeks, or months before?
Well, if I'm in the process of writing, a lot of it depends on the ebbs and flows of life outside of podcasting. So just for an example, right now, today I recorded an episode that I wrote about 2 weeks ago. That was the first time that I had any time to actually record it. But now I'm in the process of editing some episodes. Maybe next week I'll start writing the next episode. So everything is always in some part of the process. And I know the topic of next episode. I probably have one more episode in this little mini series after that, and then I'll be going into my next series. So once I go into the next series on American history, that I'm going to be very much more careful. I'm going to outline what I want the topics of those 10 episodes to be, and then I'll work from there.
Now, in your process, do you ever find sometime after recording and publishing an episode, and you're doing more research for future episodes in, say, this mini-series or whatever it is you're doing, do you ever go, oh, I really should have added all this to the episode I published 6 weeks ago, but now it's too late, so I'll have to sort of whack it in here?
I found that with certain episodes, and it might not even be so immediate, an episode that I maybe recorded 5 years ago, and I'd like, I have a different understanding of that, or a different, and I've done that with a few. I remastered a few of the earliest episodes. I think it was the first 5 episodes. I went back and added a lot more information and clarified some of the things that I did. Mostly, though, I think this is a good medium for fire and forget. Do it, and then if you want to revisit a topic, be purposeful of it. I've done that with a few things. This is this episode, but it's revisited with new information. I think you could drive yourself bananas going back and redoing everything that you don't think was completely up to snuff, because we're not scholars. And I'm sure even a scholar who's written a book, that's why they do multiple editions, is because there's always something to add.
Speaking of scholars, I mean, as you have mentioned, we are amateurs. I like the word buff. We are buffs. We have no formal training in any of our topics, but our role, as I said, we are popularizers. But the issue then arises, how much have we missed? How dare we take on this role? So what do you think of us amateurs / buffs versus the professional scholars?
I don't think that professional film critics have anything on us. Anything that we have to say is just our opinion as much as it is their opinion. I don't think they have some access to knowledge that we don't. But going into professional academics, of course, a professional academic is going to know vastly more than we're ever going to know on the topic on any different level, oftentimes. But I think that we come in with a different perspective on things. And sometimes the perspective is wrong. It's something that's been hashed out in the scholarly debate. We can try and give them the 80% view. And maybe the 10% on either side of that middle lane is more where the truth is, or that's where the truth is going. We can give the person out there a base of knowledge to understand. So if a scholar does come out and say something that's in that 10% to the left or to the right of the center lane, they can understand, well, that's not the middle. Why are they saying something that's in the other sides? Is it total wackadoodlery, or is there a different thought pattern that the mainstream has missed? If we aim to give what's the standard tale, that's the best we can do. And I think that that's something that we can do reading through the secondary sources.
We're there to act as guides. But in general, the professors just do not seem to podcast. I suspect one of the reasons for that is it does not contribute to your academic standing. I mean, all academics are meant to do research. The more the research, the better. But the primary research outputs are meant to be books and papers.
I think some of that's changing a little bit. I've talked to some people who are recent PhD grads or in the process. There's some, at least lip service paid to outreach, but it very much seems like lip service. And they're treating it in that way of just, it's something I've got to put on my CV because if I have a podcast or a YouTube channel, that'll raise me in the ranks of the 150 other people who are going for one full-time tenure track professor position. It's more of something to do it, not for the love of that medium.
And I suppose that is where we differ to the professors. We do this because we love it.
I think, too, not to belabor this point too much, I think for academics, no matter where they are in the process, they really can't be, in the common parlance, raw or real. They've got to withhold a little bit. They can't go on to wild speculation. They can't go and bash somebody who is higher up in the rankings than them.
Whereas we have no one to answer to, save our audience.
And if the audience likes it or they don't like it, we've at least said what our piece is.
Now, do you pay any attention to download stats?
I check them on occasion. I kind of feel like they're like your, I don't know, do you have something called a 401k, a retirement account that's invested in the stock market? You'll have a heart attack if you check it day by day, or if your crypto wallet, you check that. I don't think anybody who does this sort of thing doesn't care. They wouldn't do it if they didn't want people to listen. You want people to listen. I mean, what do you think about that, looking at the stats? Do you get really granular? Because I don't think that any of the places really give you stats that you can really do anything with anyways.
No, I'd agree with that. Now, ever had any crazy emailers, like threatening to turn up to your house?
Not like you have. I've had some ones that are interesting, or what I've always found is that the emails, I might disagree with them and I might have to set them aside to think about some of them now and again, but nothing off the wall. But I've had in YouTube in particular, off the wall comments that are just trashing and savaging every word. If you lived your life caring with some random person who got bee in their bonnet over one thing that you said on YouTube, and they type out something that's absolutely savage, and I think you have to be able to separate it. It's that this person isn't one of the people who I really highly respect. I can always say that I've gotten way more emails that maybe had a criticism in there, but then we've gone back and forth and had really interesting discussions. I think that that's happened more than just somebody who comes up and just says horrific things about myself and my lineage and my progeny and then never responds. I mean, there's been a few, and those ones just get deleted.
Now, Steve, in the past couple of, months, years, you've become a noted apiarist, although you prefer the term beekeeper. How did that happen?
But it's interesting to how that all unfolded. Originally, for the first 7 years of the podcast, I lived in Buffalo, New York. I was a full-time teacher there, and for a wide variety of reasons, in 2020, we moved to Austin, Texas. Now, in Austin, I was able to do a lot more podcasting because I was not working as a full-time 9-to-5 teacher. I was doing some other things along the way, so I was able to do a lot more in podcasting. But then a couple of years ago, we bought a parcel of land in Texas. And in Texas, I don't know how unique it is. It's a fairly unique thing. If you have open farmland, the state highly encourages you to do some sort of agricultural pursuit on it.
Oh, okay.
And you get a lot of benefits to doing agriculture on the land. And the land that we have really isn't good for traditional farming. You can also raise bees. And I was like, bees seem kind of cool. You can hire people to do the bees, But I was like, I don't need somebody else to do the bees. I'll just do them myself. And so within about 6 months, we went from knowing absolutely nothing about bees to having 12 beehives.
12.
And so just the process of learning all about how to take care of them and the seasonal, people, if you can get into something that's agricultural, where you can really get your hands on the land, so to speak, I think you learn so much more about where your food comes from, where your clothing comes from, like these basic things, and how challenging and difficult it is for people of where these products come from. Last year, this time we got 350 pounds of honey from 12 hives, where this year we only got 150 pounds of honey from 16 hives.
Oh.
So it shows you just how year to year things can change dramatically, and you just start to pay more attention to the weather and to how things are growing and how other factors. I think that it's really, and maybe it sounds a little hippy dippy, but I feel much more in tune with nature. And I think it's made me understand a little bit more about the Bible, to be quite honest, and more primitive societies, you might say, agriculturalist societies.
But do you have to test the honey with instruments or something all the time? Or?
In Texas, and I think in most states they have something to this degree. Some are a little looser than others, but it's called craft industries. And so if you're doing a certain amount of volume of sales, or in the case of honey weight, the amount of regulation you're under is a lot less than if you were a commercial apiary that was dealing in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of gallons of honey. Then you're getting into federal regulations. Texas, at the very least, the regulations are there's certain labeling requirements, but there's no testing involved with it. That's one thing with honey, is that there's very little testing altogether. So if people out there, just your honey PSA is that a lot of the honey that you'll buy in the grocery store that says local or organic or this or that very likely isn't any of the above of what they say they are in the label, at least in the US. And I think that that's pretty universal around the world, is that they're not highly tested, especially the bigger ones might be, they have more requirements as far as labeling and that sort of thing.
I've often wondered about that labelling, because certainly in Australia, honeys are often labelled ironbark honey, clover honey, this honey. And I'm thinking, well, how do you know?
Now, there's a famous one from New Zealand, Manuka honey, feed off of a certain thing, and that's very highly regulated from my understanding, and highly tested and everything.
Well, thanks, Steve, for coming on and giving us an insight into your behind the scenes of your podcast and your life and your bees. I'm still surprised you can fit in all that stuff that you do into a single life and not really annoy anyone, or your family.
Oh, I annoy people plenty. Yeah, thank you so much, Gary. This was such a great idea, and I'm very appreciative that you came up with this idea and thought of me as someone to talk about it. Look forward to more collaborations.
Absolutely. As you know, my show has gone into afterlife mode, so there will be occasional episodes on any damn topic I like. And I hope to have another collaboration with you soon. Toodles.
Caring for someone with dementia is one of the toughest journeys, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm Allison Schreier, and my experience caring for my husband inspired me to create Zinnia, a therapeutic streaming service designed to support people living with dementia and reduce caregiver stress. Zinnia offers research-backed videos intentionally created for people with dementia, engaging, calming, and easy to follow. Whether you need to Ease agitation, create moments of joy, or make daily routines smoother, Zinnia is here to help. Family and professional caregivers use our content to turn challenges into opportunities for connection. Accessible by subscription on mobile devices and connected TVs, Zinnia is simple to use whenever you need it. Because when caregiving feels easier, life feels better. Go to zinniatv.com and sign up for a free trial today. Use the code RESOURCE for 15% off an annual Zinnia subscription.
The Historical Jesus Podcast is the sweeping saga of the life and times of Galilean Jesus of Nazareth, as well as the faith, religion, and church founded to honor and disseminate his acts and teachings. Join me, Mark Vinette, on this fascinating journey through time, exploring the many great works of Christian theology, literature, architecture, music, and art inspired by the words and deeds of Jesus Christ.